So first of all, just to very briefly summarize, well, who is this workshop is for? So we built it in mind with other coaches and well-being professionals in mind. First of all, people who are looking for better ways to support our own clients, people that we are working with. So it's coaches and well-being professionals, but also therapists, counselors, psychologists who want to have extra coaching tools and coaches who want some more therapeutic tools for mental health. So there is a gap. We're trying to bridge a gap for those. We're also looking for people who are working with organizations. So anyone who's working in the organizational setting, HR people, well-being leads, mental health leads, other professionals who are looking for ways to support well-being and mental health of either your staff or your employees in the organizations. You'll definitely get some insights on organizational well-being practices. And also for other mental health ambassadors, influencers, people who are looking to use their experiences to make a difference, to help others as much as possible. And sometimes people either with lived experiences or those of us who have maybe some family members who are struggling. So to have better understanding of mental health and how we can support them in a better way. So thank you for those who are joining late. Really good to see you guys. Please feel free to introduce yourself in a chat and just let us know who you are, where you're coming from, what you expect to gain from this workshop, why you're joining this. Feel free to use the chat as a bit of a networking space as well and share who you are, what you do. Drop your LinkedIn link in a chat as well so you can connect with other like-minded professionals who are here sharing the same values. No problem, Sheila. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Great. So I hope these are all right people in the right place. Really good to have you here. Now, what can we expect out of this? So we'll look at the very broad and very generic overview of the limitations of the current mental health system. So what challenges are we facing in our different roles? And I definitely want to hear some of your input as well, right? So you come from different backgrounds with different experiences, and I'd love to hear as well what challenges you are facing in your role that really stops you from maybe either giving or receiving the services and support that you would like. And then we look at, well, in the ideal world, how the future of mental health should look like. And we look at the aspects of it for how it would look for individuals, for organizations, but also for other professionals working in the field. So all of us, right, who are really battling through trying to make a difference there. And again, I'd love your input as much as possible. So engage in a chat as much as you can, and use it as a space to network and connect with others. And we look at more of a proactive aspects of it. So what can we do about it? So how can coaching be used for mental health, and why coaching is the answer, or maybe not. Maybe you have some other approaches to that. We look at the role of building the right supportive networks and community to really make this change happen. And also, what is the role of neuroscience in all of that? So hopefully that kind of gives very, very broad, but quite a holistic approach to where are we now, where are we going, and what should we be doing next? And if you have any questions, feel free to drop the messages in a chat and use that space as much as possible to interact. So welcome, Becky. Really, really good to see you here. And welcome, Sheila. Really good to see you as well. I think you're working with organizations as well. So welcome here. Okay, so about me. Well, so we've kind of learned what we're going to be covering, but you know, who am I and what entitles me to be preaching on this sensitive topic, right? So very, very briefly, without taking much time, My background comes from two very separate fields, really. On one hand, I've been working for nearly 20 years, actually, in leadership development and talent strategy. And I've been helping companies scale by building their talent, by creating the infrastructure for developing their people within the organizations. But at the same time, I was working as a therapist and a coach with people who are suicidal, people who are struggling with a variety of mental health conditions. And I ended up specializing in supporting people who couldn't be helped through traditional medical route. So maybe those people who find traditional therapies ineffective, or who can't get access to it, people who've been on medication for most of their lives, and they don't really know how to kind of live without it or how to get better, people who tried a lot of different types of therapies and find it ineffective. So I specialize in affective disorders, so that is mood disorders, so things like anxiety, depression, OCD, trauma, and psychosomatic illness. So these two backgrounds, really, on one hand, you could say I've been working in this high performance environment with executives, with leaders in this high pressure environments. And on the other hand, I've been working with the most vulnerable individuals who really struggle with the same experiences sometimes. And for me, when I was volunteering, especially at the start for the charity called Maytree, where I was working with suicidal people, it really raised a lot of questions for me, why certain individuals are placed in exactly the same environment, and then yet they respond so differently. So one of them will go, yay, I can grow and learn with this and become better and stronger. And another person in exactly the same environment will be struggling to cope. And what makes a difference? And when I started my research in psychology initially, and got qualifications in NLP, hypnotherapy, CBT, some other psychotherapeutic approaches as well, it didn't answer for me all these questions, because everything was about circumstances and your bringing and what happens to you. And it really didn't explain the individual differences. And that took me on the route of studying neuroscience to really understand what shapes that individual resilience, why individuals respond so differently. And I've then developed quite a lot of unique neuroscience-based approaches to support those people who couldn't be helped through those traditional, more kind of medical routes. So just bear that in mind as well, that sometimes when I introduce topics of mental health and when I talk about mental health, my approach is very critical, and take that as well with a pinch of salt, because that's a representation of my experience, that I've been really working with those people who couldn't be served through this traditional model. So it really gave me a lot of different views and points of view to look at alternative ways of helping and supporting. So hope that will explain some of my critical approach to that. So at some point, I've combined some of this leadership development work with mental health support and neuroscience research to create my Elite Mind consultancy, where we are looking at strategic well-being support for organizations and helping companies to scale and grow, but in a way that doesn't sacrifice individual health and well-being, where corporate profit doesn't come at the expense of your staff well-being. And I still work as a mental health coach and continue working with people who need that individual support. I'm also a co-founder of Elite Mind Academy, where I have a team and we are training now some of those neuroscience approaches that I've developed. I really want to pass on to other professionals. I know what difference does it make, and also a lot of people-facing professionals who do this because they love what they do, because they want to help others, are very often struggling to create successful business out of that. So there is a business side of that where I'm just by nature of it, I ended up mentoring and coaching a lot of other therapists, consultants, and starting coaches to help them to start their own businesses. I'm also developer of the Wellbeing Compass, and that is a psychometric assessment that helps to measure individual and organizational well-being. I'm so sorry, my dog is going mad in the background for some reason. I think someone's at the door. So sorry if you can hear the background noise. And most recently, together with Elite Mind Academy staff and other professionals, we are developing coaching for mental health accreditation. So I'll be very privileged to tell you a little bit more about that later on if you are interested. But enough about me. Now I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. So I would love to hear a little bit more about what challenges you are facing in your current work, in your current environment, in your current setting that you are working. So you are here because I believe in some capacity you are working within mental health field, either as a coach, as a therapist, as an ambassador within organizations. So I'd love to hear what struggles you are really currently facing, and what do you feel is stopping you from making that biggest impact? What are the limitations that you are experiencing? I'd love to hear that in the chat. So just take a few moments to reflect on that. And if you like, feel free to unmute yourself and talk instead. So you are welcome to either type in the chat, or you're welcome just to unmute and take your turn and share with me what you think, what is stopping you in your environment. I see Jonathan is saying mental health is not in our heads, it is in environments. Definitely such a lovely statement, and it's very often mental health treatment, traditional mental health treatment is not really addressing the environment in which we are in, right? It's not facilitating us to change that environment. And that's where the role of coaching can be very helpful. So knowing how to choose our environment, how to change our environment can have very powerful effect on our mental health.
Yeah, thanks, Evelina. I hope am I okay to talk here?
Is of that course, right? Yeah, go on, Jonathan.
Since you mentioned me anyway. Really nice to meet you. My name's Johnny. I go under the stage name of the Anxious Fireman, if any of you see me potting around on LinkedIn. When you asked that question, I was unsure which angle to go with. I come from a couple of backgrounds. I'm not going to spend ages on me, but I work primarily in the fire and rescue service. I'm an officer and a leader there, and then I'm a psychotherapist, and then combine those to offer the training that I do. I find the biggest challenge I have, both within my place of work, within the fire service, but then also within the places of work that I go into, is to sort of convince leaders and CEOs and the management that there is proactive ways to stop people becoming unwell. It seems often to be a very sort of reactive environment at the moment. And forgive me if I tread on anyone's toes here, that's never my intention. But any responsive sort of first aid or kind of EAP, they're all good and they're not necessarily a bad thing. But there's things we can do to stop people becoming unwell. Psychological risk assessments. There's things like wellness action plans. There's management techniques. There's looking at stress and how that can be minimized, and workloads and management sort of techniques that can stop people becoming unwell, and I find that's the biggest challenge to get over to people at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I see Sheila has unmuted herself briefly. Feel free to chat, because I know you Sheila, doing some great work in helping to create some of the ISO health and well-being standards. Is that right? You want to just introduce yourself a little bit briefly and and share what challenges you are facing in your role when you're trying to implement that work.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's pretty much what Jonathan's just said, really. Can I just apologise up front? If you hear a strange noise, my dog is snoring. It's really noisy. Yeah, I think it's really getting business leaders and management to buy into the fact that providing this mental health and this well-being and all of this support is actually good for business. And again, I don't want to kind of sound like I'm having to go at anything that's gone on in the past, but well-being is about good work. And I think that some of the messaging that's been around mental health and well-being over the last few years, especially with things like mental health first aid training, EAP, and all of this, these are all very individual based approaches. So let's sort out the person rather than the factors that are contributing to the person getting ill. So as Jonathan's just said, it's workloads, it's not having the right tools, the right resources, poor relationships with managers. These are the things that are causing people to become ill as a result of work. And it's not because the person necessarily is weak or not able to cope or is struggling. And I just think it's really challenging in the work that I'm doing, is to try and get business leaders to see past what they perceive as being fluff, to really get into the fact that providing good, psychologically safe and workplaces with great cultures is good for business. And it's easy for them to kind of evidence this. It's easier to put the numbers in place that would, that there's big organizations that have already done the numbers on this. You just need to apply them to your business, and you can see that there is an absolute tangible return on investment to be had, but it's still seen as a soft skill and a soft contribution. And yeah, so I for me, it's business leaders and this, is it people and profit and not really being looked at properly. I'll shut up now because I'll just keep going on.
Absolutely, Sheila.
I can kind of add to that one. Yeah.
Well said. Yeah, absolutely. Because it's sometimes you can see, and maybe some of you as well. I know BEP is doing resilience training, and sometimes even this resilience is also saying like, right, let's just bring in resilience trainer in to put all of the responsibility on the person. Like, we'll put more pressure on them. They just need to be more resilient, right? So promoting this more responsible leadership, where leaders need to step up and take ownership and know that actually the only way to improve the business results is by looking after your people and putting them first, right? So really, really well said. I see Peter have his hand raised. Go on, Peter.
Well, I just hear what you're saying, Sheila. I come across the same thing. Business leaders saying, well, I thought I was employing people, not patients. And why should I pay for his family? I recruit, I employ him, not him and his family. Because all this mental health problem we have, some of us in the business talk language that businesses do not understand, for example. We talk our own language, but we don't talk their language. So they see us as a cost, just like they see their employees as a cost center, and a commodity, not as something that actually is necessary for them to get the profits that they want. So if we just then talk about, well, if you invest, as the latest figures say, £1 in mental health and well-being, you will get £5.30 back. They don't see that because it's not coming in via a check into the bank account. So the thinking out there is short-term thinking, short-term ROI, but what we are offering is something longer term. And they think before they even ask, well, what's this going to cost me? Not what is this going to give me? So there's a whole mindset thing going on there, which is they like the spreadsheets in the C-suite, but they don't understand where the numbers come from. Those actually generate the numbers. And then we turn up and we say, oh, just some bloody coach and bloody psychologist. Well, some of us have actually been halfway through our career before we, like me, became a psychologist. So I have taken psychology to business, not just coming out of university thinking I know everything. So I got the hard knocks first and see what's out there. And it's a difficult message to send, because then we start talking about ROI because we try to speak their language. But that just reinforces their language. It doesn't get them onto what we want to talk about. So it's a very difficult one, this one, where by the way, I hate the term soft skills, because the most difficult subject to work with is people.
Yeah.
That's
But
nothing.
the perception is for soft skills rather than power skills, which is what they really are.
Yeah, but when you talk about power skills, I get a bad connotation about power trips and people wanting power instead of something else. So we have a language problem in psychology, I believe. It's very bombastic, it's very robust, and people get scared of it. So that is why I call myself the emotional weightlifter, because I'm trying to explain what I do without using counseling, or people freak out completely when they hear therapy. We can't have that. So I think we collectively want to do the right thing, but I am still not sure we have found the way in, because those who need it the most are the ones who are completely closed off, not wanting to listen to us. The other part who don't need us are the ones who get it already. So there's those in the middle who need convincing, but we need to get their noses out of those spreadsheets and see a bigger picture. And I don't know if it is turning the org chart upside down. So you see, because right now it's like CEO is at the top and then everybody else further down. It goes like that. Most important person at the top earns the most, has the most power. And then further down, you get paid less and less. If we flip that on its side, CEO at the bottom, all the doers at the top, then, well, who services who? So it has to be the CEO servicing.
Like servant leadership, right? And again, for leaders to take that responsibility, and for us as professionals to be able to translate, and again, even the ROI, finding maybe the better languages to describe, what is it that they're supposed to be investing in, right? Because if they are just looking to invest in people for the sake of having greater profit, then we are doing, sometimes the right thing, but we're doing for the wrong reasons. And the effectiveness of our ways of working will never be fully realized, because leaders are not doing it for people and with people really in mind, right? I see Suzanne also has her hand on. Suzanne, do you want to share your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'd just like to say that I agree with the points that have been made already about some of the barriers that are in place. In a way, I feel that mental health is sort of blazing a trail, and it's sort of coming behind employee engagement. So, we've seen employee engagement struggle to get leverage in senior teams. I think more teams are convinced of the value of engagement itself, but I sort of see mental health as being a topic that sort of sits with employee engagement. I've done lots of work in hundreds of organizations within employee engagement, and I coach CEOs and senior leaders. And what I think I would add to this whole discussion is really culture. So I think one of the things that we really struggle against with trying to promote good mental health is the culture that exists in organizations, which, let's face it, is very often promulgated from the senior leadership anyway. And I think, that the struggle is actually starting to appreciate that senior leaders can be equally vulnerable to mental health conditions themselves. And I have seen and worked with individuals in that space. So I think culture is something to think about, and some traditional management styles still being out there of command and control, as opposed to involving and empowering.
Absolutely, Suzanne. I'm really, really happy to hear that, because I think the culture that we create in organizations creates that right environment, right? And I think, as Johnny mentioned before, it's all in our environment, and organizational culture is that environment. And environment can be the biggest intervention for mental health. And unless leaders can really see it and create that in a way that is supportive, then there is no way forward, because we need to role model those right behaviors of vulnerability and being open from the very top. And for me, personally, working with some of these high performers, there's been so many times when again, there is still this huge stigma attached to, you know, these top performers, executive CEOs being vulnerable or, you know, having some mental health issues. And the fact that it's okay for them to go to a coach, but it's not okay to go to a therapist, opens this door of opportunity for coaches to actually access those people who otherwise don't want to raise their hand and say, hey, you know, I have this problem. So the number of times that, you know, people order performance coaching, and yet behind the closed doors, you have tears and letting go and sharing some experiences that, you know, they don't feel that they can open up otherwise and show their vulnerabilities, is still a big barrier that we also need to address, because like you said, Suzanne, it's those top leaders that are role modeling that culture of, you know, being human. We are not just CEOs, managers, these high performance athletes, you know, when we go into, let's say, you know, elite sport and so on, it's exactly the same culture where, you know, it's, you have to be strong, you have to be resilient, you have to perform. And yet, you know, there is all these other aspects of being human that are kind of being forgotten. I know there are a few people here who maybe don't necessarily work within the organizational setting, maybe work with as coaches in a private setting. And I know that there is a limitation of coaches. You know, it's like nearly, do we have a permission to work with mental health, right? There is a big debate about should coaching be used at all within mental health space, or should, you know, this be left to licensed professionals? So I'm wondering if there are any coaches who would like to share some of their take and see what they are experiencing from, you know, some of their struggles within their field outside of the organizational setting and one-to-one setting. Would anyone like to share?
I'll be happy to.
Yeah, go on, Peter.
Yeah. When I got went to coaching school and got my qualifications, I was already a psychologist, and I sat in those coaching sessions wondering, well, what's the bloody difference? Because there's a lot of overlap between coaching dialogue and the counseling dialogue. So I went and did coaching the way I was taught, otherwise I wouldn't pass the exam. So I had to refer certain clients to counseling, and they never did that, and they never came back to me. So they hit that mental block, that personal something or other, and I wasn't allowed to help them, even though I could. So having graduated, got my diploma stuck in the drawer somewhere, I could then go and do what I do, and that is basically just look at the client from where they're at, and whether it's coaching or counseling, I don't really care what technique or method or modality, whatever language you want to use. I'm not signposting what I'm doing. I'm just switching from one technique to the other so that we move on, so that the client gets to from where they were or to where they want to be. And it's sometimes it's a big mess. They turn up with goals, and then all of a sudden we have a counseling session or two in the middle. For me, it's not a problem. I just think, I don't know anyone who does it the pure way, just purely counseling or purely coaching. I can't see that working. I think we have to have skills in both fields. No one can be equally good at both, I think, but we're all human beings. We can all have a conversation, and I may need to refer someone if it's as an area within psychology that I'm not specialized in. I'm not going to be a rank amateur and trying to fix somebody's personality disorder, for example. That's not me. It's not where I am. But I'd be happy to have a suspicion and ask him to go and seek help somewhere else. I just think we have to be careful not to overstep our abilities, but we shouldn't look at what we do as in the pure form. I've tried the pure form of coaching. It doesn't work. Certainly didn't for me. I couldn't get anywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad to hear that, because it's exactly what I'm seeing from my experience from some other coaches that I'm working with, that again, they say, like, you know, you go through the training and they say, you know, you should be a coach, not a therapist. You refer other people to, you know, other specialists. But like you said, people don't want that, because they are seeing you for a reason. right? If
Yep.
they wanted a therapist and counselor, they would have gone there in the first place, right? And also as coaches, there are these blurred lines. And the fact that you say, that they say, well, you should be a coach, not a therapist. And if you meet someone with mental health issues, you shouldn't work with them. You're betraying that person's trust in that way, right? Sometimes also, if we don't give that training to coaches to be able to work with mental health, we are probably creating more risks, because then you might be working with certain conditions and certain situations without knowing it, without knowing how to safeguard yourself, how to safeguard that individual in the right way. So I agree, there's always blurry lines, and there are things missing in the middle that would really equip us with those tools to do both. But I think I do have some answers and solutions for that. So I'll tell you a little bit more about it later on.
Just one more point from the world of psychology. You can now get a qualification in coaching psychology through the British Psychological Society. I was one of the founding members of what was then the special group in coaching psychology back in the day. So it's been recognized already a long time ago that there is a huge overlap, and that one methodology can apply to the other, and vice versa.
Absolutely. There are definitely plenty of crossroads and ways where people can have a bit of both worlds, and yet it's still, at the moment, you still need to be a licensed psychologist with coaching skills, rather than being a coach who is allowed to work with mental health. So there is definitely more recognition for the need for coaching skills within the psychological space, but other way around, there is still a long way to go, which can be justified to a degree, because again, coaching is unregulated industry in some way, or kind of there are limited regulatory requirements there. So definitely we have to thread those carefully. So I'm really glad to hear your reflections on that. Right.
Can I add to that? Is that okay? Or if you don't need to move on?
Go on,
I guess I'm going to come back from a psychotherapeutic point of view. I'm not a coach, I'm a psychotherapist. And I respect entirely what Peter says. I do feel, however, sometimes here's maybe the problem with language and where we're at with the mental health world, is that at the moment it's a bit of a free-for-all. And you can pretty much, anyone can set up as coach tomorrow, even psychotherapist technically. There's no legal requirement. And I do think we need to be careful, almost opening up a space where anyone can be anything. There's a reason we have qualifications, there's a reason we do years of training, there's a reason that you have supervision as a psychotherapist, that you have to be insured, that you have to be regulated. I'm with the BACP, for example. So whilst I respect entirely that, yes, this can be some crossover, I think we need to be careful you see it in mental health first aid, people who sell themselves off as professionals because they've done a 7-day training course. And I think you've got to be careful not going down a dangerous road where anyone can kind of jump on what at the moment is, or can be, quite a profitable bandwagon as well, and do keep some standards.
Absolutely, because at the end of the day, it's someone's life and someone's health, and who are we to play with fire, right? So absolutely, the standards, safety, safeguarding always have to be a number one priority. And I think it's for that reason that we also need to give coaches some of the mental health awareness and training, because if they're not aware, then they are probably often crossing those boundaries without even knowing, and making some damage without even understanding what they do. So not necessarily enabling coaches to suddenly treat conditions or work on specific things, right? But still being aware of the complexity of the human experience and suffering and all of that comes with mental health, that those all people facing professionals should be aware of. So absolutely. Thanks a lot for that great point, Jonathan. It's definitely priority to safeguard others as a number one thing. So let's just look like, I'll try to very briefly kind of go over some of the summary of, what I see from my experience from working with some of my clients of what is wrong. And feel free to comment in a chat as well as I speak as well. If you have any additional information, you disagree with something, you want to make additional comments, please feel free to type in a chat. So we're looking first at, public healthcare. And I think here there is a big limitation that currently, even before the pandemic, they were overstretched, underfunded. And we're looking at the access that is available. It's pretty much postcode lottery. In some areas, it's great, depending on where you live. But then there are some other areas where it's literally nothing. And also the type of the support that you would get, what type of therapy you would get, it also depends on what kind of professionals you have around you in that region. So it's really unfair lottery in that way, that people in some affluent areas will have access to support and others will never have a way to even get to it. And then if you do get to it, then there are obviously huge waiting lists of people. And even before the pandemic, in some areas, the waiting list for seeing a secondary line of support could be up to 2 years. And this is just not acceptable. And I think the average is something around 7 months. That was before the pandemic. I think that was 2019 data. So for someone who's feeling depressed, suicidal, and struggling to get through the day, what does it take? What does it mean to wait 7 months in that waiting list? So it's really not acceptable. Then we're looking at the effectiveness of it, right? So I know CBT is with the research and from academic proof is seen as the most effective approach. However, there are a lot of different therapeutic modalities, and there is no really robust research that would match very specific type of therapy to very specific condition, for example, or very specific person, right? So it's a very limited research that would say, right, you are this type of person with this type of condition, with this type of environment, therefore, this will work for you. And it's exactly the same with medication. There are so many different types of antidepressants, so many different types of variety of medications and SSRIs, and yet there is no proof of which specific medication will work for a specific person. So people try and average 7-6 medications until they try the one that fits them. And it takes up to 6 weeks for this medication to even start working. So whether we're looking at CBT, whether we're looking at medication, there is really very little way to choose the right approach and right method for the right person. And now when we finally find what works for that person, we start looking at their relapse rates. And even with things like CBT, the so-called success rates of CBT is on average 60%. And however, around 80% of people relapse within 18 months, which means that is a temporary fix that, help that person for a period of time. And then yet they are not being given these tools to help themselves. They are being made reliant on this external support, whether it's a therapist or a medication and so on. And as soon as they stop taking it, their relapse rates are really high. So there's been a charity called Talk for Health, and they've actually calculated, if you have those layers of how many people who need help can't access it, to those who access it, what is the rate of effectiveness, and out of those that have it effective, how many of those relapse at the end of it. And they calculated that what we really have, that only 8% of people are actually served by the traditional medical model of medication and CBT, which is, to me, is shocking, right? Because then what else is happening with the rest of 92? And I think that's what drives me to do what I do and really try to create some of those solutions that are alternative, and there are different ways of doing things. And then again, we're looking at, we have this medical model with labels, with DSM and ICD-based diagnosis, how desirable that is for some people. And we still have huge stigma attached to it. Those diagnostic labels can sometimes be a relief because it explains why a person feels the way they feel, but also it can be a big limitation. Sometimes it's the only way to access support, the only way to move forward, the only way to explain to the person why they feel the way they feel. But now let me ask you this question. If you could explain to the person, to your client, why they feel the way they feel and why they experience like this without giving them a label, would that label have value? And if the person would be able to access support without receiving the label, would that label have value? So the label in itself is only a way to explain to the person what's happening to them. And it's only a way, and often the only route to get support through the medical route, right? But if you take that away, then it's stigmatizing, it's limiting, because now person is justifying why they can't do certain things, like, well, I can never do XYZ because I'm depressed. I cannot achieve that success because something happened to me in the past. So sometimes people are using that as a way to freeze them in those states and justify their limitations, instead of thinking, okay, that justifies, that explains maybe why I feel the way I feel, but what can I do about it? What is in my control, rather than just relying on a therapy or a medication and so on? What can I do about this? So definitely the public healthcare at the moment, really, the current approach is very disempowering, right? It makes person reliant on external support. It's very difficult to get it. The access is very limited. It doesn't work for all. It doesn't work for most. There is no way to tailor a specific approach to each person. So it's a huge, huge problem that existed already before the pandemic. And now with the rates of mental health really doubling and nearly tripling, actually, in some areas, it's very clear that public healthcare is not equipped to address the scale of the problem that we are facing right now. Which then brings us to all of the private healthcare, right? So we have this, the private healthcare, but the question is, how many people can afford it? And it can be expensive because, of course, the quality of the training that we as professionals go through, it's costly, is lengthy, and of course that has to then represent in the price of the fees that we are charging. And yet, from my experience, when I mentored other coaches, starting consultants, these professionals, now you think like there's such a huge problem with mental health, and those professionals who have tools to help, they're still struggling to make a living out of helping others. And how comes, right? When you think about that, there's such a big need, and yet those professionals don't know how to offer the services in a right way to the businesses, how to offer it in a right way privately. And now when we think of, from the client point of view, well, what's your starting point? So imagine someone who is depressed, someone who is maybe potentially suicidal, somebody who's really struggling. And now they'll say, okay, I cannot get access through NHS, or it's not accessible to me, or it's not effective. I want to go privately. Where do you even start? There's so many different types of therapies, so many different professionals. How do you know what works for you? Again, there is no way that there's no choice, and there's no easy way to streamline the support that would say, okay, if you have this problem, you need to go to this professional with this specific qualification, with those specific skills, because that's going to work for you. And then because of that, you have this overwhelm of choice, and professionals then thinking, how do I stand out? How do I become different? How do I know that I can help this specific person? Who is my audience? Who can I help? So we all become just therapists, just coaches, and so on. So it creates this overwhelm from both sides. Clients don't know how to find the right support, and professionals don't know how to stand out and reach the right people who you can truly help, right? Because if we try to help everyone, then most of the time we just get lost in that noise. And then the most importantly, then how do we measure that success, right? So even from individual point of view, when you go through your therapy, through your coaching, through your consulting, whatever that might be, At the moment, all of those professions are still mainly using all of these diagnostic questionnaires, sometimes still with pen and paper, that are based on DSM, on ICD criteria, that are symptom-based, right? For how long you've been feeling blue, and here is your depression, right? Based on that, and so on. So it's really looking at the symptoms rather than looking at, is this even a problem? And how is this a problem? How is this condition manifesting for you in all different areas of your life? How does it affect your work? How does it affect your relationships? And can you measure the success of this support intervention on all these different areas of your life, right? So there is really a lack of those clear measures. And then again, based on that, lack of practical application. So sometimes you have awareness, and yet, what do you do about this? Can you get tools to help yourself rather than being reliant on this external support for the long term? And there is this big problem, especially that I really found when I started studying neuroscience. There is this problem of narrow disciplines. And now we are seeing some boundaries being blurred. But you see, if somebody is studying mental health, they are studying mental health. If somebody is studying nutrition, they're studying nutrition. If somebody is studying hormonal health, they're studying hormonal health. But all of those things affect each other, right? When you look even about finances, one of the biggest reasons for male suicide is a financial situation from which people don't feel like they have a way out. And yet that is not necessarily covered or considered in any risk assessments when you are assessing somebody for suicidal risks. Nobody's checking for your financial situation, right? So we are missing a huge portion of people who are simply not getting the right support for the right reasons. So now we're starting to look very slowly at, links between, let's say, gut health and mental health, hormonal health and how that affects our mental health, nutrition, and so on. So there are all of these different fields that start to slowly blur the lines, but yet when you start to go deeper into academic research, you still have these very, very narrow disciplines and very narrow research that really prevents from looking at the mental health and health in general in very, very holistic and human way that includes this biopsychosocial approach. So we can really see this still as a very, very big limitation. And feel free to type any comments or anything that you agree, you disagree, anything else. So definitely holistic views are missing in physical healthcare as well, and too much specialization. Absolutely. So from NHS point of view as well, I don't know if you know those stats, just to kind of back up what Suzanne was saying. 63% of first visits to NHS are due to mental health related conditions. So not necessarily for purely mental health issues, right? So in comparison to, let's say, someone comes in to see GP because they are depressed, that's direct mental health concern. And around a third of people who go to NHS are because of mental health issues. But in total, around 63% are going because of mental health related issues. So you might go there because of high blood pressure or because of your obesity, for example, and so on. But those conditions might have been created because you are overeating emotionally, and that affects your cardiovascular health, right? And yet then the person starts treating your heart or give you blood pressure medication, and it's never addressing why you have that high blood pressure in the first place. What are these other environmental factors that actually created this condition in the first place? So it's definitely this holistic approach is missing in both physical and mental health. And then we're looking at organizations. So I think this is a topic close to most of your hearts, as most of us work with organizations and really trying to make that difference within the corporate environment. And I think some of you mentioned that already. There is this huge level of talking level solutions, right? So everyone is saying, let's get this influencer, speak on the stage, wave the flag and share their lived experience. But then yet you encourage people to talk, and what happens next? We don't actually teach people how to listen. We don't have the infrastructure to support those who open up. We don't have the strategic approach to implement support within the organization that is preventative, that stops people from developing those issues in the first place, right? And the environment is sometimes creating those mental health conditions in the first place. So when we're looking at the burnout and work-related stress is still such a huge problem. The other very important aspect here to address in line with this kind of lack of those strategic solutions is the difference between well-being and wellness, right? So people talk about well-being, but they really only implementing wellness solutions. So what's the difference between wellness and well-being? So when you talk about wellness, here is your gym membership, here is your yoga class, here is your fruit bowl on a table. That's wellness. That's maintaining your best state, right? So your self-care practices. So when we say wellness, I want you to think about self-care. But when we talk about well-being, I want you to think about happiness. How happy are your employees in their work, in their lives? How happy they are with everything that they do, and just creating, just adding, gym membership and yoga class or the fruit bowl doesn't really address why people are stressed or depressed in the first place. Why are people are leaving that job? Why there is such a high turnover in the companies and so on. And very often you see now there is this very popular mental health first aid approach that is being used as a quick fix. And mental health first aid has a lot of credit and benefits. However, I have to really highlight this, and it's something that I feel really passionate about. Mental health first aid as an organization do not take any ownership and accountability for who comes to their courses, why they are there, are they right people to attend this, and what happens after they leave the course. So the whole training is pretty much based on awareness, and it's again built on these traditional diagnostic statistical manual definitions, which creates this culture of people then going back and nearly diagnosing each other. And as you encourage to have those conversations, say, oh, that looks like depression to me. And that looks like, you might have some manic depressive symptoms there and so on. So we should really not be doing this. And yet the way the training is delivered can sometimes promote these bad habits and behaviors. And also, most organizations don't actually have an infrastructure and support ecosystem to support mental health first aiders themselves. So most of the time, there's no way to select the right person to go to the training and then back into the business. There is no way to strategically provide support to both mental health first aider and individual. And I had to unfortunately address this very, very serious scenario where mental health first aider with some lived experiences when being sent to that training, and then they came back to the business, and within a few weeks time somebody came to speak to them, and it was Friday, and the person said to them that they don't see the point, they don't want to live anymore, and the mental health first aider tried to kind of direct them to all of these supports that are available on mental health first aid list, which, to be honest, it's all the same resources that are accessible anyway. You can Google them, right? This is not anything special that mental health first aid provides. It's just collection of those resources in one place, so you can refer people easily to. So the person tried to refer the person to some different places, and the individual said, well, I've tried this and I've tried that and nothing works. So, thanks, mate. I'm not going to take that next step. And I think Peter also mentioned, right, when sometimes we refer the person to the next step, sometimes they don't take that step to self-refer and to seek help, right? And then they said, well, talking to you really helped. That's all what I needed. I really needed just to talk to you. Please keep this confidential. You really, really made my day. That's been really, really helpful chatting to you. And the mental health first aider didn't take any action, and they came back on Monday. and the person was missing at work because they have taken their own life. And the mental health first aider, as you can imagine, is in complete shatters because they feel responsible because they haven't escalated. The organization is now blaming the individual because they haven't reported, they haven't escalated it. The individual thought that they're doing the right thing by honoring confidentiality because that's what they've been asked to do. The company had no any other escalation procedures or anywhere else for that mental health first aider to go to check whether they're doing the right thing. And it was a big mess that I've been then called in to sort out. And unfortunately, those kind of scenarios are happening all the time. And there is a lot of risks that are being created by not having the right support infrastructure to support mental health first aiders themselves and to make sure that it's placed within the wider strategic support infrastructure. So I just wanted to share that with you, and maybe that there are some learnings out of that you can take, because we really need to make sure that if company has mental health first aiders, they are really provided within the right ecosystem of the support. And then, of course, we have charities, and as you know, they are always reliant on begging and donations and so on. Therefore, for as long as we have limited resources, we will, of course, have limited impact. And it also, because charities are providing the services for free, it also creates some dependency behaviors. So people feel like, oh, you know, when I get to that place, there's going to be someone there, that someone's going to help me, someone's going to save me, someone's going to do something for me, someone's going to donate, someone's going to support. And it's really create the circle of lack of empowerment for the person to take ownership of their own life. So there are these limitations in within those corporate worlds as well, and obviously there is more. These are just the main summary ones that I thought it's worth highlighting. I see some people have their hands raised. Do you want to share anything?
Jonathan came first.
Yeah, go on, Peter and Jonathan. Yeah, go on.
I'm easy. I'm happy to wait. I don't mind. No, I just kind of, I think some of the things you're saying, just to reiterate sort of my feelings about them, certainly the idea between well-being and wellness. If we go back to that, I think sometimes you get this sort of idea of the name toxic positivity. I'm not sure I like that name, but it's kind of the umbrella of it. And I think one thing I've certainly seen in organizations is it's almost, if we sort of convince people to be well, if we sort of try and insist on people being happy, if we insist on people feeling good all the time with gym memberships, lunchtime yoga, whatever it may be, actually what we're missing is the dialogue about when people feel rubbish. And that's 10 times more important and much more valuable on a therapeutic level, but also an understanding level. So this idea that we need to sort of push for positivity, I disagree with it. I think we need to create environments where people can come and say, do you know what, I'm having a rubbish day. And that'd be absolutely fine, and that'd be okay, rather than constantly trying to push a narrative of, you know, well, if you feel bad, you know, just think positively, you know.
Yeah, and also not blame that individual, right? Because very often you're creating this culture, again, going back to this organizational culture where it's okay to speak about it and it's not wrong. It's not, you are not going to be blamed back, because sometimes people receive a lot of blame in return, as if, you know, like, how could you feel this way? Yeah, sure. And also when I was working with suicidal people, they also said that that's the biggest response that they usually get is, well, how could you feel this way? Look, you have family, you have a good job, you have XYZ. So people put in your face all of these things that, you know, you should have. that. They know that they have it, but it doesn't make them happy. They don't feel it. They don't feel fulfilled. They don't feel, you know, whatever. And there is this lack of, how do we even receive this, right? How do we really know how to listen? Just talking in itself is not enough. Definitely is the whole culture of support that is missing. Thank you so much for sharing, Jonathan. Definitely. Peter.
Yeah, just a sort of a mixed bag here. I did the mental health first aider course because I wanted to understand what it was, because I couldn't like it, I couldn't hate it unless I'd taken the course, and it was run quite competently by a psychotherapist, and we all learned what we could and what we couldn't do. But then again, what do people do afterwards? It's entirely up to them. There's no standards out there. And if a company does a tick box exercise and get a couple of those in, they may set some parameters for what they can and can't do. But if the whole organization doesn't know that, then why would I go to one of those? Because I don't know, well, what's the point anyway? In physical first aid, I believe first aiders are not even allowed to put a sticky plaster on a wound, because there might be risk of allergy to plasters or something like that. So there's very limited stuff you can do. You can stop the bleeding, you can refer, but then what? I think businesses are attracted to what I call shiny box syndrome. They want to buy a package, EAP or whatever, where they have ticked the box. We've now done something for our employees, but it's not being taken up. It's not relevant half the time, so it's not being used. So that's those quick fixes that they look great, but there's no substance behind it. So should we have mental health first aiders? Yeah, I think we should, but I do understand the risk that it poses, because you could end up getting in a worse situation legally. But yeah, I'm in two minds about it, because poor mental health in business is also a huge business risk in its own right. And the higher you are up the organization and the worse you feel, almost the bigger the risk, because then you can't control what's happening further down. So something about who those of us on this call are, and who other people are not. The blue light services, Jonathan, you know that. You are trained to walk towards danger. Normal people's instinct is to run away from danger. So I wouldn't go into a burning house. It's your job to do that. Police walk into a fight, I would run away from a fight, but it's their job to split that fight up, and so on and so forth. So mental health first aiders, have they been trained to walk towards danger, where everybody else in the organization steps away? But are they trained well enough?
Yeah,
Are they just stepping closer, but not doing anything?
You're right. And, even again, when you say it's first aid, by the nature of that term, it doesn't actually, the training doesn't have anything practical to provide that first aid to the person, right? So even if somebody is having a panic or anxiety attack, they don't know how to switch it off, right? Yeah, absolutely. So there, there's real lack of, we can talk about it, but there's nothing else there, right? It's just, gives awareness of some of these clinically described conditions, so you can talk within that framework. But definitely there is so much more that is needed. I'm not saying that mental health first aid in itself is all bad, but the way it's implemented, the way it lacks the screening for who's attending and why and what happens after, and the way it's embedded within the wider business, that's definitely is something that mental health first aid as an organization are not taking that responsibility. And that's something that I just really want to highlight, that unless businesses know how to do it themselves and how to create that, then it's probably better not to have those mental health first aiders, because it creates risks. If you have the wider ecosystem of support, then that's great. Have that as an additional tool. Absolutely. So thank you for sharing, Peter. So this I think we kind of really covered already, what is needed and so on, by highlighting some of those issues. But you can really see that public healthcare is really moving towards integration of more of a community-based support, more of a holistic approaches, greater acceptance of this biopsychosocial model. And the one thing that is really excited at the moment is, again, this recognition that coaching is needed to complement traditional well-being and mental health. And last year in May, if you are aware of that NHS accepted this new training program that they are rolling out to train first-line mental health people to be able to have some basic coaching skills. So that's a great initiative. However, I have to say that, of course, you are adding additional skills and additional training to the workforce that's already overworked, overstressed, and that still doesn't have funding, still doesn't have enough of those professionals, doesn't have those resources. So it's great to see this recognition, but how exactly it's going to take place, how exactly it's going to be implemented, that's still a huge question mark. And my approach is to do it other way around. And what we are doing at Elite Mind Academy is a specific accreditation that allows qualified coaches to be able to work with mental health safely. And that doesn't mean that coaches would be necessarily treating any mental health issues, but that would simply allow people to work with a human being, not with a label, regardless whether they have some of those labels or conditions or not, right? So how can we do that safely? Because obviously coaching has huge capacity there. So it's great to have this recognized by NHS. Within private healthcare, you can see a lot of health tech innovation happening. There's a lot of things that are happening in the startup ecosystem. I've also been part of Zinc VC Accelerator program. I know a couple of people here, Einav and Becky, they were also part of that as well. And it's really good to see that VC ecosystem is now recognizing the need to invest in impact startups, in startups that drive that health and well-being. So there's a lot of innovation happening there, mainly within the space of digital assessments and measures. So how do you measure your health? How do you measure your resilience? How do you measure your well-being? And based on those measures, how do you then develop some of the algorithms and machine learning principles to then personalize right approach and right treatment to the right individual at the right time? So there's a lot of investment going into those fields at the moment. And we are seeing also much more collaborative approaches developing. So as we know, as we start to specialize, we cannot be specialists in everything. You specialize in a specific field, in a specific discipline, in a specific area, or you are serving specific audience. And it is great to be able to then refer others within the same framework and network to other professionals. So if we have this overview of how exactly that looks like, and yet we don't necessarily be a specialist in nutrition and in hormonal health and in so on, but you know how to recognize the signs when those fields are affecting someone's mental health, and you have someone to refer them to. So we can see more clinics opening up that have more of this holistic approach with kind of all under one roof houses, where you have a wider awareness of training, but you also have professionals on board. And this is something as well that we do at Elite Mind Academy, where we look at having different professionals on board, because I'm not a specialist in everything, right? I have awareness, broad awareness of things, and I'm a specialist in specific things, not others. And again, this is something that I think Johnny also mentioned, this preventative, proactive well-being. So the real need to understand the causes, real need to understand the drivers of that poor mental health, and understand the environmental factors that are affecting it. So those are kind of the main themes within which mental health is going. And very briefly, we can dig in a little bit into how does that, if we are providing the right support to the individual, how does that look like on individual level, and how does that look like on organizational level? So when we're looking at individual approach, I'm using here some of our well-being compass model, where we put a lot of research into understanding, well, what is it that driving your capacity to maintain your own health and well-being, right? So instead of asking how good is your health or how good is your well-being, we're asking how able are you to maintain your self-regulation? How able are you to build resilience in specific situations? So we're looking at understanding from neurobiological perspective these capacities that allow you to maintain your good mental health. And instead of just looking at symptoms and labeling you with specific condition based on the outcomes of that, we're really looking at measuring the input, measuring the causes of that within physical, emotional, cognitive, and physical aspects of it. So when we look at emotional well-being, here we're really looking at your capacity to self-regulate, your ability to build resilience, your ability to grow with challenges. And also there is a very big aspect that it's still very, very rarely recognized within mental health space. We know this mind-body balance from physical health point of view, but there is more to it because we have this so-called somatic intelligence. We have the lessons that your body takes from your past experiences at cognitive, emotional, somatic levels that become frozen states at the nervous system level. And people who have poor emotional health, they will have very poor physical balance. If you ask them to stand on one leg, they'll be struggling, right? And you can see the principles of those. So there are ways of building that balance by working with the vagus nerve and polyvagal theory, for example, is a huge step towards that. So I definitely would encourage you to look it up as well. So there's a lot of research that looks at overall nervous system and how we can self-regulate ourselves, how we can learn to practically do that instead of just measuring the symptom. Then we're looking at cognitive well-being. And now I've been very, very conscious not to name this mental well-being, right? Because again, when we think about mental health, well, what is mental health? When we think about term mental, what does it even mean, right? It's quite a negative connotation. And when we think about mental, what are we exactly talking about? Are we talking about the physical brain? Are we talking about your mind? Are we talking about your consciousness? What is it and how you measure it? So to me, as a neuroscientist with a scientific background, unless I know what I'm looking at and unless I know how to measure it, I shouldn't be working with it, right? So to me, when we start talking about cognitive well-being, now it's something that has a neuroscientific basis in the brain, in the way how our memory works, in the way how we drive our behaviors, in the way our brain is wired to feel, to think, and to do things. And when we think about setting goals, when we think about utilizing some of our subconscious processes of our brain, some of our executive functions, but also some of these limbic processes of our brain, when we understand how all of those processes interact, we can really work with the brain rather than with the mind, right? And when we work with the brain, it has the positive effect on your mind and the well-being in that way. So I'm definitely promoting this way of measuring things. And within the cognitive well-being, we're looking at your mindset, your approach, the way you see the world, the lessons you take out of your past experiences. We're looking at your motivation. We're looking at your purpose, your ability to make a contribution and feel valued in your community, but also your ability to implement knowledge and practice. I'm sure most of you in the field have met many people who will go to every personal development event and attend every seminar and will read every personal self-help book, and yet their life doesn't get any better because they don't know how to implement that in practice. And that is a huge part of your cognitive brain functioning that definitely we need to be addressing and working with. Then we're looking at social well-being. Again, we as human beings, if we look from evolutionary perspective, we have evolved to be in the group. In fact, we would have not been able to survive over millions of years alone, right? Our survival depends on being part of the group. And therefore, in this individualistic society that puts so much pressure on the individual and everything is up to you, we actually lose a lot of sense of connections, and we lose ability to build and maintain those in the right way. And within that section, there is our identity. Who are we in this community? Who are we as an individual, as part of the wider group? How we form those relationships and supportive networks for different purposes. Do we belong to the wider group? Do we feel included? Do we feel accepted? How we are similar and to whom? How we are different to others and whom? Being able to understand our identity, our clear role in that society that allows us to make a contribution, has a huge, huge role to play in our mental health. So this definitely has to be considered as a way forward as we're building those new solutions for mental health. And the final aspect is this physical well-being, and it's really all about our physical body, our physical health, but also our environment. So we're looking at the way where we live. We're looking at our ability to have our own safe space, to have our own privacy, to have our financial stability and security, access to nature and outdoors. That has huge, huge impact on our mental health. We're looking at the links between mental health and physical health. So only recently there are things being confirmed between links between inflammation and depression, for example. And when we are looking at treatment-resistant depression, so people who have depression and are taking antidepressants and it does not work, there has been now confirmed links with inflammation in the body that stops the SSRIs from working. There's been links with gut health, and you probably know that over 90% of your serotonin is actually produced in your gut. So if you have unhealthy microbiome in your gut, if you have inflammation in your gut, if you are not eating right foods that are an ingredient for making serotonin, that will affect your mental health very big time. And yet, even when we're looking at SSRIs and when it works and when it doesn't work, it also has links with a very specific combination of specific gut microbiome in our bodies that creates, again, the right environment for that specific treatment to work or to not work. So there's a lot of research that's happening now with some of those specific links. And also we're looking at hormonal balance, again, specifically for women. We're looking at menopause. We're looking at what's happening with our monthly cycles. And a lot of those things are not being taken in consideration. In fact, nearly 70% of women who are menopausal are being prescribed antidepressants because doctors do not understand the symptoms and what the body is going through. And that is just simply not acceptable. Where we're supposed to be having maybe some hormonal treatment to be prescribed antidepressants instead and making matters worse. So definitely there is a huge part of research that we are looking into. How can we understand those signs? Do you know how to notice some of those signs in your clients when we work with them? And we don't necessarily have to be experts in hormones and gut health and inflammation, but we need to be able to notice the signs where maybe you need to refer someone to address some of those specific physical conditions before we can work on them or their mental health. And the very big aspect here as well, we're looking at safety from harm. During these recent years of the pandemic, you see a huge increase in domestic abuse, in domestic violence. We're looking at physical harm and also psychological harm. And I know Sheila here is focusing on quite a lot on this ISO standard on creating psychological sense of safety at work. That's definitely a huge step forward. There is definitely a lot to be done to understand the harm that is being done to us and how it affects our mental health and how can we manage those risks. Peter, you have your hand up. Anything you want to share?
I just wanted to ask a question, really. The link between depression and inflammation in the body. Is there a particular organ that is inflamed, or is it wholesale throughout the body?
It's not specifically about specific organ. I think there are aspects of inflammation in specific areas of your body. However, what it's being looked at mainly is at excretion of cytokines in your bloodstream. And they can come from different areas, but it's the amount of cytokines that are inflammatories in your body, and sometimes they are also increased by stress. So prolonged exposure to stress and things like burnout has this stream of cytokines that are being released in your bloodstream that prevents a lot of other healing processes happening in your body. And cytokines are blockers for a lot of serotonin-based medication. So there is a link between that as measures and that. But there are a lot of different types of those inflammations, definitely. Yeah. But with the inflammation, that's where you can see the link with a lot of autoimmune disorders with people who have mental health illnesses. So you see that, irritable bowel disease, for example, it's common with people who have mental health issues. You have joint conditions and, different types of arthritis that are going together with a variety of mental health conditions. You have a lot of skin conditions that also are kind of matched with some of those mental health conditions, and they all have links with inflammation in different organs.
I'm asking because I'm also using TFT, or thought field therapy, which is the original soundtrack that EFT copied. But it's based on old Chinese medicine. When Dr. Callahan started this about 40 years ago, and every treatment point refers to an organ in the body, and there's not a one-to-one link between that organ and an emotion, but there are some commonalities between certain emotions and certain organs in the body. So I was just curious whether there was a specific one, because there is a specific tapping sequence for depression, which also has proven to be effective towards physical pain. But right. So just out of interest, but also you mentioned people on antidepressants and anti-anxiety pills and whatever else it's called. I have so many clients who are on 2 to 3 different anti-anxiety pills and on antidepressants, and they come to me for, guess what, anxiety and depression. but what the medication does is it deals with the symptoms. It doesn't deal with the root cause. That's right. Yeah. And you take the pills away and the root cause is still there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in exactly the same way that, again, there is still very limited research about how exactly those SSRIs work, and then when we have those different conditions, again, it's a trial and error, what works for different person. And it's a little bit of a test in that way. And there is definitely a lot of research between specific physical conditions and specific emotions. So suppressed emotions are being different when you think about what is emotion. Emotion is energy in motion. It's a specific flow of energy in our body that then during some traumatic experiences, that flow is being interrupted. And based on that emotion, different emotions are affecting us in a very different way, right? Every emotion has its own specific cocktail of neurohormones and neurochemicals. So obviously, each chemical and neurohormone is affecting our body in a different way, and it's activating or suppressing specific organs. So when, because of the trauma, because of specific our emotional experiences, we interrupt some of this natural flow of this energy, we are naturally then affecting some of our physiology, and the different organs are being affected differently by different emotions. And it's a fascinating research to look into, but it's quite complex because there is still not known to the detail how exactly some of those processes interact, right? How specifically, what is the cause and what is the effect? What is the direction of the travel between specific specific feelings, emotions, thoughts, physical health aspects, and so on, which is really, really fascinating field, which I'm very much interested in. And this is the flaw of modern science, that current science still doesn't necessarily have tools and the right measures to prove some of those ancient approaches to health. So you're talking about this Chinese medicine, for example, we're talking about Ayurveda, which is really using food as medicine, and it really addresses so many different ways to correct our body and inflammation in our body, and even self-correct different emotions. We are looking at, again, things like mindfulness and meditation and yoga. The only one that has a scientific proof now is mindfulness. That has been studied a lot, and neuroscientists scanning the brains of people in meditative states, and there has been clear benefits proven of that. And this is something that I would definitely love to invite you to think about it, that I think we live our kind of life and evolution with this thought that, we're always moving forward. And I don't agree with that, because I think a couple of thousand years ago, people were much more aware of our body. We had much greater connection with nature, with each other. We had much greater awareness of our own health and what is the right thing to do. And we lost that knowledge. We lost that intuitive knowledge by prioritizing our rational, logical thinking and, the human cognition and so on, at the cost of the holistic health. And when you look at those holistic practices of Chinese medicine, of yoga, of Ayurveda, and so on, there is a lot of wisdom in there that is not being still proven by science, but I would say yet. It's because our science hasn't caught up yet with some of the technology that would be able to justify some of those complex processes. But just because we cannot explain it with the science, it doesn't mean that it's not valid.
I think science is doing an awful lot to rubbish what is out there that they, whoever they are, haven't studied or approved yet. Thought field therapy, for example, has been given a pretty rough ride because it's not part of the traditional treatment selection. But if you then look at something like heart rate variability, you can measure a person's HRV before, during, and after TFT treatment, and you can see the benefits. The heart does react positively to the TFT, whether or not the client actually has the massive reaction or a more subtle one. The body understands what's going on. But so far it has been rubbish an awful lot, even though there's loads of research that's been peer reviewed at the right levels and so on and so forth. I use it, it works, and I don't care what the scientists say.
That's great, and actually I'm glad to hear that you are mentioning HRV, because again, there's a lot of the neurofeedback that we could be using, in terms of skin conductance, in terms of measuring our breathing, in terms of measuring heart rate variability assessment. There is so many different things. Voice as well. Now, voice has a huge potential to even diagnose conditions in a way that is not subjective, that doesn't require you to fill in pen and paper tick box exercise, right? That really creates tailored assessment for the shift in your state. So that's definitely, from this kind of technological aspect point of view, that's where the health is going, that we cannot separate mental health from physical health. We can be working on, psychological aspects of our well-being, but we need to be measuring it in our body with our symptoms of our physical health, with our heart rate variability, with our, aspects of other measurable neurofeedback that we can get, right? By biofeedback, not necessarily neurofeedback. There's a lot of different aspects of biofeedback that we could be measuring. So definitely then, when we look at all these aspects of physical, emotional, social, environmental well-being, how can we make sure that we apply that in organizations? And I'll really not going to go into details with that, because I think, it's been really nice to have this discussion and have your collaboration and contributions into that. So I'll go through those very quickly, and then we can have a bit more of a discussion. So how can we make sure that each organization has capacity to maintain all of those 4 aspects of individual well-being? And we are looking at 4 aspects here. So we are looking here at training and development. So do your people know how to help themselves and others? Do they know how they can achieve this high performance and these targets without personal sacrifices? Do we know how to provide training and mental health awareness at all levels, from onboarding, from hiring to firing, right? In an entire process, do we integrate our mental health awareness in all of that? When we're looking at things like support infrastructure, which is the next aspect there, we're looking at internal and external support. So what can we provide internally? And what is it specifically that we can do? When do we need to refer elsewhere? Because again, as much as businesses are taking that responsibility, we cannot really be expecting businesses to become also experts in mental health and be delivering those therapy sessions. So there is this fine line between knowing how much to take on as organizations and where we need to pass on externally. And then we're looking at aspects of data monitoring. So how do you know what works on individual level, on organizational level? How do you measure the health of your culture? How do you measure health of your strategy, for example, right? Your well-being strategy in your organization. And also, what is the relationship between individual and organization? So when organization puts out there some sort of strategic initiative, how does it affect each individual? How do you measure that? And as individuals go through some change, through some situation, through restructuring, through COVID, how do we know what we need to do within the organization to provide the right support to them? So having a data monitoring that communicates this data between the two. And then finally, governance and policy and the legal compliance. So really making sure that we have all of the processes, procedures, and legal documentation in place to protect the business, to protect each individual, but also so that we have clear process to follow, that it doesn't leave a gray areas, that everybody has information for where to go, what to do, and whose responsibility is it at what point to provide any specific supports at different places. Anything you would like to reflect on, guys, on any of those kind of 4 categories of the organizations, as I know most of you work within businesses?
Just one thing perhaps on number 4, the awareness in the organization of what's actually there. I read a survey, a global survey from the legal profession recently, where I can't remember the exact number, but almost 50%, I think it was, of employees did not know that there was, for example, an EAP thing in place.
Yeah.
So yeah, we put it in place, but we don't tell anybody about it. We don't tell them how to access it, or if we do, we don't do reminders. So it's all those little things. Once you have actually invested in a subscription for that, well, why not make your employees use it so you get some value for money out of it? But if it is just a tick box exercise to make sure that, and when the next auditor comes around, yes, we've done this, yes, we've got a little bit of evidence that we've done it and some people are using it, it's great, hallelujah, but actually nobody gets much value from it. That's
absolutely. And there is a reason why, when I called in to kind of assess organizational well-being strategy, I look at their communication and reporting lines for exactly the same reason, because I look at what is your communications policy? What are your reporting lines? And sometimes I get some odd looks for that, because they say, well, what has that got to do with mental health? Well, it has everything to do with mental health, because if you don't communicate with the people in the right way to set up the right culture, that will affect your mental health. If you don't set up right reporting lines to who person should report their struggles, that's already an issue. And as you can see in most organizations, their policies say, who is the first person you go to if you're struggling? Your direct line manager.
Mm-hmm.
But it is your direct line manager who's responsible for your promotion, for example.
Yeah.
And now from the human point of view, if you are as a manager doing the right thing, if you have a promotion coming up and you know that this employee is already struggling with too much in their personal life, and now you have the promotion coming up, you think you are doing the right thing by not putting extra pressure on this person and giving them extra thing to do. But maybe that promotion is exactly what that person needs to get a bit more of motivation and vision in their life to get over through the difficulty. And it shouldn't be the decision for that line manager to make. And yet, if we don't have the infrastructure for the person to go for support elsewhere confidentially, and definitely there are certain things that line managers need to know, but also there needs to be a confidential lines of reporting and support where the person goes for that. That is not the direct line manager. So there's a lot of different aspects of how we build a communication strategy and policy in place that affects mental health huge time. So I'm really, really glad you're mentioning this.
Because
communication lines.
what do you do if your immediate manager is a reporting line and it's the immediate manager that makes life hell for you at work? Do you then go and say to that immediate manager, look, blah blah blah, no,
you are the bully and I'm struggling because of you, right?
And
Absolutely.
then what do you do when you know that HR runs a black book on people who complain about a certain person? So HR is typically there to protect the business from the employees. So what do you do? How it needs a complete mindset shift at the top to make sure you don't have those cul-de-sacs where employees can go and think they get help, but actually they're just going to get more hell.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, sometimes HR role is to protect the business from employees, and it's then given to them to also look after those employees. So they're also themselves in this very conflicted role where, you know, they don't know what is the right thing to do, and it creates a lot of conflict. So definitely there's a lot of these ways of supporting clear policies and procedures and monitoring of our actions that need to be in place to get the right thing out of that. Yeah, so basically I'll just leave it at that, you know, with a bit of, you know, I'd love for you to even share, speak, reflect in the chat, you know, what you've learned, what's the biggest takeaway, and what you need to do next. And those are my contacts. So feel free to book a call with me if you like. And that's my phone number and email address and LinkedIn profile. I'm probably connected with most of you. So feel free to reach out to me with any other questions, any other help or support that you feel you might need. And I'd love to hear from different experts as well who can fill the gaps within the well-being Compass license, so we can have also a network of supported of individuals within those specific fields that we can refer to when I work with organizations and personal clients. So thank you very much. I think I will stop recording here, but you feel free to stay on for a few more minutes to ask me any other questions, any other thoughts or reflections that you have. So thank you very much.